Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody. Including officers. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the rear of the room. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. How the heck I'm supposed to get there, I don't know. There's no ramp.
I'll carry you. We'll carry you.
I think I'll get Dan to do that for me. Right. Apologies for absence and substitutions. I've got one apology from Nick Robinson, Councillor Robinson, and Dan Putty. Councillor Putty is taking his place. Is there anybody else? No. Declarations of interest. Anybody? Urgent matters. I have none. Minutes of the meeting held on the 1st of November 2021. Do you all agree? Okay, I'll sign them afterwards. Decision 5. Decision to charge fees in relation to the determining fit and proper reason applications for managers or mobile home sites. Is that over to you?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Louise, did we have a determination on that one or not?
Yeah, the committee decision.
Second?
Committee decision.
Committee decision. Yeah. Marvellous. Good. Sorry, we were just having a little debate about whether this was a committee or an executive decision. Rather than waste your time making it a committee decision and then be told, no, we had to take it to the executive, Thank you. I'm so used to being the loudest person in the room that I very rarely bother with the microphone, it has to be said. But your point is well made, Councillor. So there was some discussion as to whether it was a committee or an executive function, but I'm pleased to say we've now had two legal rulings to say that it's a committee function, so you have your pound of flesh on it. Firstly, apologies that this paper has been a long time in coming. It's so long time in coming, in fact, that it's on the old format for the committee. Apologies for that, though I suspect most of you haven't taken too much concern over it. So basically, the Control of Development and Caravans Act 1960 is one of our less charming pieces of legislation. And obviously we've been doing it since 1960, the licensing of caravan or mobile home parks or park home sites as they've evolved to be these days. The regulations that came out last year require the fit and proper person test to be applied to operators of park home sites. This hasn't been a requirement up until now. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with park home sites, but often they are used to house some of the most vulnerable members of society because they are a cheap way of getting ownership of your property, although as you will be aware, you only own the property that is on the site. You do not own the ground upon which your property sits. So you have to pay a ground rent each year to the landlord. And that obviously puts you in a less secure position than if you were to own the freehold of the site. As a result of the vulnerability of many tenants and the fact that you have to pay a ground rent, it is unfortunately common for these sites to be run in a poor manner, where there is pressure put upon tenants to remove structures, generally poor management practices. As a result of that and many complaints, we now have the introduction of the fit and proper test for the landlords of this site. That in itself, I think, is fairly uncontroversial. You're all licensing committee members, therefore you're used to the fit and proper person test for taxi drivers and proprietors. It is exactly the same format. What we need to do, though, is obviously we need to cover the costs of administrating that service. It's only a one-off cost, but it is a cost. And rather than that cost being borne by the authority, as these are a commercial activity, we are allowed under the legislation to charge a cost for that fit and proper person test. So what you're being asked to vote on this evening is just to approve the charging process, effectively. This is early doors for this. We will, as with all fees and charges, we will review it on an annual basis. But the aim is that we get this done as soon as possible, and then we can go out and fit and proper person test everybody and charge for that.
Yeah, hi Rob. 1.4 it says, also I just must submit an application by the 1st of October 2021. Are we a bit behind the curve on this, or has it happened already?
I think the phrase "a bit behind the curve" may usefully cover it, Councillor. This is one of those bits that definitely fell victim of COVID, shall we say. We are also fortunately blessed with a rather small number of park home facilities within the borough, at least one of which is our own. So there hasn't been perhaps the pressure upon us that there might have been for other authorities. We have already approached all the operators. They're all aware it's coming in, and the application form is all drawn up. We're just really literally waiting for the committee to approve or approve with amendments as your decision goes this evening.
Yeah, got two questions, one joins the other. On section D, page 14, you've got the minutes or the hours, or you tend to how you're going to charge. It just seems it comes to if I've added it up right, 6 hours 50 minutes to do one application. That seems rather a lot. And the reason I was querying that is because what you said earlier is they're vulnerable people who haven't got a lot of money, and these costs will be passed on if they're too high. And is that with a visit? Because further on in the paper I read that you may have to visit the site to see if it's up to scratch. Is that part of the cost? And that's basically it. I'm querying how many hours to write. I assume it's done manually on a computer, nearly 7 hours, 6.5 hours to sit on a computer to do one application seems rather a lot. But if I've added it up right, other than if you're visiting, that may be more.
I think as a man who sets fees and charges, as you know, and has done for many years, firstly, the time elements here are ones that have been widely used by other boroughs and districts across the country. So, as Councillor Phillimore so accurately pointed out, one of the advantages of being a little behind the curve is you can see what everybody else has done. So we are looking at what established practice there is now. But yes, we will be going out. This is an average cost, Councillor, and we know from our own experience that for some of the operators, they will be very organised, they'll have a very good application, it will be correct, and we can process it fairly swiftly. Other ones, there is considerably longer because there is obfuscation or delays or missing material. So what you have here effectively is an average to process them. So some of them may take a week to process, some of them we may do in half a day. So it's more of an art than a science, shall we say. But I am content that this is a reasonable reflection of the costs that will be incurred by the authority.
I will come back because I've had this reply for other officers, senior officers, because other councils charge, we seem to follow a trend. That it shouldn't be it. We should be charging what we need to charge, because I have concerns. If we're dealing with vulnerable people in these places, and a lot, as you say, a lot of them are, and I know some of these sites are pretty awkward because we've dealt over the years. I've dealt with a few. We need to put the hours in, but I have concern. Oh, let's put it this way: I have concerns. I feel that's rather a lot of hours to do one application. If I'm honest with you, I don't know what the time should be, but we shouldn't just be following up the road. I don't know, Hart or one of these others, because they charge, we're charging. Oh, I don't agree with that. I'm sorry.
Can the councillor please?
Sir?
I'll just put it on so I can speak when you're ready to call me.
No,
On?
you're not next.
On.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. I understand your concerns. We have a number of issues here. Firstly, this is the first year that we've done this piece of work. Yeah, so there is an element, you've got to start somewhere with it. Secondly, this is pretty much a one-off cost. Yeah. So this isn't an ongoing burden, if you like, upon the residents of these areas. Yeah, so I think the costs are reasonable for the work that we're going to be putting in. Yeah, as I said to you, we will review the fees and charges. If we find that this is substantially out, then we will amend them for future years. Yeah, I've got to start somewhere. I've got to make a progress on this. I'm happy this is not disproportionate to the work that's involved or the other costs involved in operating one of these sites. In fact, I would say it's pretty small beer compared to the cost of operating the site. We just beg your allowance at this point in time, really, to move forward in this way. And as I said to you regarding Councillor Finnemore, this does look at practice elsewhere. And whilst yes, we're not blindly and slavishly following the work of other people, it's a good guide, shall we say, and we will be foolish to ignore the experience of others.
Councillor Hosing?
Just first of all, quickly, I assume that these are hours and minutes. I mean, the first one says 0.25. Is that quarter of an hour?
Quarter of an hour.
That's quarter of an hour. Right, so it'd be nice to have the units in. My concern is I need more information understanding the words relevant background and financial standing. Are there hard and fast rules, or is this a judgment call?
So the purpose here is to establish whether there's financial propriety for the operator.
Sorry, I understand that, but how do you judge that? Is it a black and white test? Is it truly objective, or is it subjective? Is it what you consider, or is it black and white that would stand up in the court in law?
So what we'll be looking at here is, is the person bankrupt? Yeah, or are they shown to have issues where they're operating at deficit? That's what we're looking at here, rather than we're looking for somebody who has a sound financial management of the site. Yeah, I can't say that we're going to be doing a full audit of their accounts. Yeah, but we will be asking for financial information, particularly if they've got previous experience of running a site. Yeah.
Yep, my point here is that is based on somebody's opinion, looking at some data. So my question is, will there be an appeal process should they object to, if something is refused, if an application is refused, will we have an appeal process?
Yes, there's always an appeal process, sir.
So there will be an appeal committee for this, or will it just be the normal licensing?
It will go to the normal licensing committee. Yeah, and beyond that, it goes to the magistrates, if I remember correctly.
Councillor
Okay.
Taylor, I think.
Thank you. Councillor Hussey's asked rather one of my questions about the process. So obviously, with taxi drivers, etc., we're given the sort of guideline. Would you want your daughter to get in a cab with this man and be taken off with him? So I'm sure we'll devise something else for these parks. Well, we've only said daughters in the past. Could I just also ask, does this all apply to travellers' sites as well? Because we know from experience that the management of our travellers' sites is absolutely critical. So will this apply to them, please?
No. This is only for park home sites. They're defined in a slightly different way, and many traveller sites are community owned, or they're operated by the local authority. And obviously we can't really fit and proper test ourselves on the grounds that we should be fit and proper. So these would be for privately owned sites where there's an identifiable landlord or identifiable business that operates that site.
Councillor Dollar.
I take your point entirely that this is our sort of first year out of the traps, and so we're kind of sticking our finger down, coming up with a reasonable figure, which we can then review next year, and it might go up, it might go down. But I noticed, first of all, you talked about that it was suggested that there was a focus on their financial health and probity. But I notice in here that it says that considering previous complaints of harassment, given that these places are, as you say, places where vulnerable people can often be put, it seems to me that a scrupulous application of a fit and proper person test is really, really important. And I wonder if we've considered carefully how we would make sure that the cost of processing application didn't prevent us from doing that. And what I mean by that is some of these numbers look a little high, some of them look a little low. Sending the final decision notice seems to be pressing an email button, which would take half an hour, doesn't seem to be right. Whereas other things, like considering previous complaints of harassment done in 15 minutes, does seem to be a bit quick. So what I'm getting at is, have we considered how we can apply some flexibility to the fee structure, whereby if we were to get into a real pickle with one of the applications and discovered that there were real problems that we really did need to investigate or wanted to investigate, that we might be able to levy appropriate fees for doing that. You hear some real horror stories from mobile homes. My mum lived on one, and fortunately there were very few disputes, although most of them were about pet dogs quite often. You sound like you're familiar to that. I just think that this is really important to get this right. I'm glad they've brought this in, and I just wonder if we've thought about that, and if we haven't, could we be thinking about it as a development perhaps? That the fit and proper person here seems to be a really important test.
Yeah, don't worry. It's a bit like leaving your thing on mute on Teams. It's just the physical equivalent thereof. So yeah, I think that the issue here is that we ask for, or we will be asking for, applicants to provide a considerable amount of information as part of this. One of which, as many of you will be familiar with, is the DBS check. And those sorts of things. Well, it doesn't actually take very long to check a DBS form, so that's pretty quick and quiet. Obviously, there may be other issues, and certainly issues for us, as we found in the past, is where we have people who have applied from other areas, who have a history of running these sites. Yeah, and then it is a matter of contacting those other areas and saying, have you had any complaints, etc., etc. So that that's very much the model that we use for taxi drivers as well. This is something we're very familiar with, which is using a patchwork of different sources to identify if there's patterns of poor behaviour or patterns of good and high compliance. Where we have issues with those, then we will reject, or we'll seek further clarification as we go forward. So it is about weeding out the bad apples as part of this process, and as we go into the future with this, hopefully that will remove some of the, because quite often what you find is that if people own one, they probably own several. And obviously if people are being refused licences in one area, there will be a declaration that they've had their licence refused, and that then informs people who may be taking them on in exactly the same way where taxi drivers have lost their licence in one area, then they will not be accepted in another area, which just moves those people out of the industry.
Thank you. Can I just ask the question? I know you said that we've referred to the experience of other authorities on this for costings, which is marvellous, and I totally agree that we have to have, for simplicity, one fee. Have we broken down the average administrative hours as well as just looking at the overall cost from the experience that we're seeing in other authorities?
Yeah, I think we've certainly garnered experience from across the country for those people who've done it. Different people have broken it down in slightly different ways, based on the enforcement cost, the investigation cost, those sorts of things. So this table is pretty much a sort of an average, if you like, of those sorts of times and data. I can't say we've specifically gone down one route or another route. We've sort of tried to come in with an average across the system. And as I say, as we go forward over the years, then we'll also start to see, because we're a bit late coming in, perhaps in a year or so's time, at the end of this year, we'll start seeing the people who were hot straight out the traps, seeing whether they're changing their fees or not. And again, that we're based on our experience of doing this. In the same way as when we come back to the fee setting later on for the animal welfare fees, we started with those. We reduced a lot of them the second year in. I'm reducing some of them the third year in now as we've got as the thing has settled down a bit.
Okay, if everybody's happy, I'll move to the Councillor Putty.
Thank you.
Did you want something?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mainly would like to know about the proper fit and proper tests for site owners and managers. So if there are multiple managers on one site, do you apply the same fees as the site owner to the managers, or what is there any difference, or is it just a set fees that we're going to charge?
It'll be a set fee, Councillor Putty. The sites, I don't think I've ever dealt with a site where there was more than one site manager for it. We deal with site owners, obviously, where they own multiple sites, and they might then have a manager on the site. There'll always be a site manager of some function there, but it's only ever one site manager on the site.
Anybody else? If not, I'll move the recommendation. You all agree? Thank you. Licence fees and charges.
Looks like I'm on again. Blimey, give me a chance.
Just try not to press the wrong buttons again.
Okay, so firstly, this is an annual paper that we bring to committee. I think I fairly heavily trailed this one in the last licensing committee anyway, so I don't think there's too many surprises here for you. So I'm not proposing to go through them all one by one, there's no purpose. Suffice to say that many of the fees and charges that we levy for in the licensing world are set and do not change. So, for example, the 2003 Licensing Act, the fees for that have never changed. So, you know, we've got no control over there. We can't change them. They're set centrally and they've never been changed in just under the last 20 years. Other fees we do have control of, and those are the ones that we're focusing on today. Those are primarily the taxi fees, and I am proposing that we freeze the taxi fees for a second year running. This serves two purposes for us as an authority. One is it supports the local trade, and the trade has been exceedingly hard hit by the COVID pandemic. Secondly, we are actively looking at the processes for issuing licences and undertaking the work that we do. The taxi licensing fees are very closely set about we can only charge what we spend. In fact, we can't charge for all the work we spend. We can't, for example, charge for any driver enforcement. That's just not allowed in the current legal structure. But the bottom line is that the trade has struggled, and my proposal therefore to you is that we hold those fees to protect the trade and encourage that to thrive. The other fees, things like street trading and stuff like that, which has been less hit, if you like. It's the standard 3% that we've been advised to put in as part of the council's budget setting process. The only exceptions to that are two of the fees in the animal welfare, which is the follow-up visits, which we are now getting better at, or rather our businesses are getting better at complying with the legislation. Because as you're aware, the animal fees only came in 3 years ago now, but that's transformed the way that we inspect businesses and the standard. And what we've discovered is that compliance is very high. We don't have issues. People are much better prepared for their paperwork and those sorts of things. And as such, it's simply quicker for us to do them. And if it's quicker for us to do them, then it's only right that we reduce the fees to reflect the time that is taken on those inspections. So those revisits, I'm proposing a £25 cut in the cost of those visits. The other key change that you have within there is an increase in the fees charged to gambling premises. Now, this follows a national review by the Gambling Commission of their fees across the sector. Now, we only licence gambling premises. There are other fees that are set by the Gambling Commission for owners and operators. They have done their own review as to their costs and the cost of enforcement, and as a consequence to that, the Gambling Commission have put their elements of fees up by around 55%, because they found that the costs are not commensurate with it. For many years, we as an authority have charged under the maximum permissible amount. That puts us very much in the exception nationally, and certainly the exception in all our adjoining areas where people charge the maximum amount. So you will see that some of the fee percentage rises are quite large on a percentage basis, but actually the additional amount raised is just over £3,000, and that's spread across 16 premises within the authority. So the actual impact impact on any of the individual gambling businesses is not excessive, but does come some way to cover our costs. And again, these costs seem to have been set low a while ago. So this really just brings us up to the level that is commonly found around the area, and better reflects our costs, which otherwise are constricted elsewhere. So those are the key changes that I'm proposing here. I can already see that there is some excitement on the floor. So I will, I'll leave that to Councillor Leeks to.
Councillor Donohoe.
Okay, I've got a couple of quick questions, then I've got something a little larger I'd like to mention, if I may. You mentioned we can't charge for driver enforcement. That flew past me, but could you explain what you meant by that, driver enforcement?
So, as an authority, we can recharge for various aspects of the costs that we incur. So, for example, we do a calculation about how long it takes us to process an application, yeah, and that informs the fee for an application. Underneath that, we then have other costs that we incur, for example, the cost of the software, even the cost of a committee like this is passed on to the drivers and the trade. But we are not allowed to pass on the cost of driver enforcement, which is probably most of an officer.
What do you mean by driver enforcement?
So if we have drivers who are alleged to have been smoking in their vehicle or to have been disrespectful to a passenger or anything like that, we cannot itemise the hours that we spend on that and encompass that within the costs of operating the service. In other words, we as an authority, like every other authority, subsidises a certain element of the licensing fees.
That's very interesting. If I may then, the other thing that jumped out at me a little bit, and I hope that doesn't say too much about me, was the cost of licensing sex establishments. Now, I noticed this because I've had contact from constituents about it and about a few other items related to sex establishments, and I think they spotted it in the papers and it sort of threw up a red flag to them. I'm intrigued as to why the cost is so high. I think I know why it might be, but I'm probably hopelessly wrong. It really does leap out of the paper. I wonder if that's a deliberate strategy to discourage establishments like that.
I think it would be fair to say that the licensing of sex establishments across the country is a fairly expensive operation. The reasons are very straightforward. It is not so much about a discouragement, because we're not allowed to discourage people through cost of licensing fees. The reason is quite simply that the cost of enforcement for those type of premises is exceptionally high. Believe you me, if we were to have an application for a sexual entertainment venue within the borough, I can guarantee an awful lot of public interest. I can guarantee lots of very expensive meetings just to start with, yeah. And then once it's up and running, there will be lots of complaints, lots of concern about it, and we will be spending an awful lot of time doing enforcement there. Whether or not there are any issues, people are very sensitive about them. There are complaints. So historically, they are expensive premises to license and enforce.
Thank you very much. And just to follow on finally, I can't see in here any licensing for sort of clubs, nightclubs, pubs, bars. Is that a separate area, or have I just not been able to spot it?
It's in there, but we can't charge for it. We charge for it, but we can't increase the fees.
Okay.
They're set by the 2003 Licensing Act. So you don't get the opportunity to vote on that, because you ain't got any control over it.
I'll come back again later, Chair, and get everybody else on the shop.
Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. Councillor Donohoe actually asked my question about the sex establishment costs.
You are not the only one.
I did wonder.
They do stand out.
Yeah. And my other question is on the gambling licences. What's a family entertainment centre? Because I don't think a family going to a gambling area makes sense. So sorry, so I don't know, like the bingo hall at the leisure centre, they've got like games at the entrance. Are you familiar with? Yeah.
Okay, so right, no, so no, that isn't a family entertainment centre. Gambling's lovely, we all love gambling. So if you operate a bingo hall, then within your licence, you are allowed to operate a number of betting and gambling machines as part of your licence, right? For people, like you say, in the entrance foyer and stuff like that. So that comes as standard with a bingo licence. So it's a totally separate issue to that. A family amusement centre or family entertainment centre is generally a smallish shop. Yeah, effectively lined out with various slot machines of varying types.
Okay.
Which is why I say the description is somewhat at odds with what your expectation may be.
Councillor Hussey? Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we actually license the gambling premises. Yeah, but the majority of gambling takes place online. The Commission for Crime and Problem Gambling are looking at ways of addressing this, even through the courts now. We are looking at, they have done a lot of research and they are coming up with some direction. Has any direction been given with regards to because we cannot say that in our borough there are lots of people who are gambling online and it is affecting their lives to the core, you see. So do we know that although we just do the gambling premises license, are we going to be looking in the future for anything else?
No. So the online gambling industry is solely the concern of the Gambling Commission. The legislation that controls the Gambling Act 2005 very clearly allocates that responsibility to them. The reason that we have premises is because it is a very local issue. It is literally the betting shop on the corner of the street. And if there are issues with that, then we can tackle those on a local basis. And that is why we have local licensing thereof. The internet, as you have so correctly observed, can be done by anybody anywhere in the world, at any time. So that requires a wholly different approach, and which is certainly not local.
Thank you, Chair. One of my questions has been answered with family entertainment. I'm glad you got that one. But I just wanted to say, really, I'm pleased with the taxi drivers and the hackney cab drivers, what we're charging. I think we've got problems. Since lockdown, I've been fortunate enough to go to different places using old Christmas presents from my daughter. I went to York and I couldn't get a taxi for love nor money from the hotel. They're saying they're just not doing it. And talking to some friends of mine, one of whom is a hackney cab driver, there is great concern. He's a bit younger than me, but he said I'm one of the youngest, and I think we got problems, and it's something we should be. I don't know what we can do as a council, but it's something we should be looking at to try and keep it as cheap as possible. These fees, because I think we got problems coming up at different times. Because if they do a job and they're only going to do it when they want to do it, a lot of these people, and you can't blame them, that's what they work for. But certain times of the day, it's quite difficult to get hackney carriages, and you can get. So I think we need to keep an eye on it. And I know you've already mentioned it, but I think it's worth mentioning it from this side that what you're doing, I think, is good, and we ought to just keep on top of it, because I think there is a problem coming up in the near future.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Jones. Your support's always very welcome for officers. What I would say is I think that the issues for hackney carriages are probably not good. just because of the business model. And I think the future is probably going to be in private hire. That's just the way it is, with, you know, the ability to pick your phone up and make your booking over the phone on the way in. The sort of reliance upon getting to the station and finding there's a row of black cabs there is drifting off, really. So I do think that is going to be a long-term change and trend within the profession. I'm pleased to be able to report that we are seeing a slow but noticeable rise in new driver applications, as people are coming into the trade. I think we've lost a lot of people who I don't think will be coming back, but we are seeing more new entrants in. And there's certainly a strong demand, as you say, both locally and nationally for drivers. So I think the trade will pick up, but it's going to take them 2 or 3 years.
It's just an observation, really, Chair. If we approve the licensing fees as set out here on the 1st of April, there's an assumption that the budget's not even voted for yet at full council. So this is only a part of the budget, really, isn't it? So, I mean, that's my observation more than anything.
Yes, I can only, you know, that we find ourselves in that chicken and egg situation where if we don't get the fees and charges in, if you like, then we fall behind with the process and we end up advertising them late. So yeah, it is a bit of a chicken and egg scenario here, Councillor Flemmore. I agree. The costings for this have been incorporated into the budget. Yeah, as you know, as I said there, we're anticipating a budgetary challenge a deficit for the carriage funding. Yeah, that we know we're not recovering our full costs there. But that's a decision for you to support the trade. That's what the decision that the authority made last year. We've identified it as a budget pressure going into the budget.
Right, let me step anybody else.
Very quickly, quick question and possibly something to follow on from it. Is there a fit and proper person test for other premises like bingo premises, licensed premises and so on, like there is now for mobile home?
So there isn't one for the licensed premises, but there are other safeguards in the licensing of those premises, if that makes sense. So that everybody here will be familiar with the fact that if it's a licensed premises, we can call it in for review. And you know, that's a power that we have. That's the check and balance, perhaps, in that process.
Sorry, I've got another question I'd like to follow on. I'll try and keep it brief. I'm worried it might be going off topic, but as I'm new, I hope you'll allow me a little bit of leeway. So I've been contacted by constituents who have concerns about the safety of women during our Basingstoke nightlife, to put it in those terms. And this has come about as a result of certain things that have happened, and they've contacted me. And I said that I wasn't sure to what extent the licensing committee would have the scope to do anything about this. But the discussion did go down the line of the sort of fit and proper person thing. It was that sort of discussion. And when you mentioned the mobile home fit and proper person, it struck me that if we were looking to apply a test like that to somebody running a mobile home site with vulnerable people who might have those sort of safety concerns, then it might be a good idea for us to be looking into ways in which we could apply a code of practice or some sort of proactive code to our licensing policy. And I suppose my question for tonight is to flag up to fellow committee members that is being talked about and that constituents have come to us about that, but also to ask you, because I've been very interested by what you said tonight about enforcement. If we were to adopt a code of practice, if we were allowed to adopt a code of practice and present it to potential licensees and say, you know, we really would like you to adopt this code of practice, would that have huge cost implications? And Any thoughts, comments about practicalities of doing something like that? Thank you, Chair.
It would be illegal. That's the first one. The Licensing Act is a presumptive act. So its fundamental basis is it presumes that you are a fit and proper person and that you are okay to undertake the, fills whatever roles you are within the Act. It then sets out 4 tests that you have to meet as a person. So if you are a designated premises supervisor, which is landlord in old-fashioned coin, then part of that is you have to hold a personal licence. And if you have your personal licence, you have to have a DBS check. So that is built in to the process. So those sort of things are there within the process of licensing. Firstly, as the individual who is licensed as a designated premises supervisor, the licensing of the premises, where the applicant must put in how they are going to protect and meet the 4 licensing objectives. That's baked into the process.
So they do have to tell us how they intend to protect?
Yes, absolutely. So they actively have to tell us, and that goes into the conditions of the premises. So if they're not doing those things, then that is a breach of conditions, and that then brings them into the issue of whether their licence may be called into review. I would also say that we work exceptionally closely with our colleagues across the way in the police, and the police have a licensing team, and Officer Phil Dennett, who's our current one. I'm not sure he's with us for much longer, is he? Our new one is PC Kerr. Work very closely with the licensing officers. We go out and we proactively inspect premises. And some of the things, I think you're referring to things like drink spiking and stuff like that. Drink spiking and things like that are things that we are specifically working with the police on to actively manage, and for premises to be able to prove that they have steps in place, or things in place to prevent those things happening or identify risks.
And would it be appropriate for us to have a code? Sorry, my apologies. Sorry. Used to being able to. And would it be appropriate then? I take your point about the illegality of a formal code, but would it then be appropriate of us to have a checklist that we held within the licensing committee or within the licensing team that said that these are the things that we would expect to see? And would it be appropriate for us to publicise what that checklist contained?
We are talking about fees and charges.
Just to very quickly answer the question, Chair. Again, illegal. You can't predetermine or set standard conditions for a licensing application. What you can do is that you can check that the steps that the applicant proposes meets the 4 licensing objectives. But you cannot set out how they will do that, because they could do that in a totally novel way and still meet the test.
Right. I'm again happy to move the recommendation. All those agree, please? Yeah. You're abstaining. Okay. Anybody else abstaining?
Actually, this is going to budget, even though I agree.
Okay, 2 abstentions. Thank you very much. The next one is about review of work programme. I believe it's Emma. Is it you, Emma, or Rob?
Yes, so the work programme coming up for the next committee is the review of the tables and chairs policy on the highway, which I may have to rewrite after an email I got today, because they're now looking at extending the COVID provision permanently. So that should be coming in April, along with street collections and street traders. And as it was brought up several times earlier, the sex establishment policy will be coming in June.